Spoke with Ehsan Khazeni about zodiacs, about the history of astrology in Persia. We touched on so many different subjects. I'm sure you're going to love this, so check it out.
Okay, so here I am. We're back again with Ehsan Khazeni from Tehran, Persian astrologer, and he is going to be breaking down the dual methods used in Persian astrology that incorporate Sidereal Indian Vedic methods and calculations with Western, and we're going to have a nice discussion about the history of the zodiacs and how they developed and how to calculate them. Ehsan, just give a brief introduction here. That I know you started studying Vedic astrology in the classical texts first years ago, then later started to study the Persian and the Western, and saw this sort of mixture of sidereal and tropical systems. And so you also developed software to calculate these things, and I'm really looking forward to what you're going to present about the different zodiacs and the calculations in the astronomy and stuff like that. So welcome, Ehsan. You could tell us a little bit about yourself first and about Persian astrology, and then sort of get into it. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're going to say.
Thank you, Sam, for having me again, your channel. The big question is actually what tools do we have and how we should use them. So if we have a hammer, actually we should use it like a hammer, not like a screwdriver. But sometimes we use the screwdriver to, like a hammer.
Not so well.
Yeah, but sometimes it works. But anyway, when we actually have a big instrument, like the big sky, the boundless sky. So, we have hundreds of thousands of ways to measure the sky in different ways, different views. And, actually, we need to know how we use and actually how because actually we are not, it's like the computer programming. We are not using the very deep layers of computer languages. We just use the interface. We just see the graphic user interface, and then there is a lot behind that, many codes behind that, and many translations happens to the codes we write and compile to different languages. So actually, when we see the chart, we simply print a chart using the software. And as you said, I'm a software developer. We just see the chart, a square with some planets written in it, and we also say, okay, this is the map of the sky for the time you're born. But it's not really the map. It's not really the map. It's just actually summary. It's a summary of all the calculations done behind. And then we also have, just if we go back something like 100 years, something like 50 years actually, then all the astrologers were using the tables, like the tables of houses, tables of the ephemeris. And if we go before that, they were just observing using the telescopes. And if we go before that, they even didn't have a telescope. So we are somehow away from the real sky. So for today, I'm going to explain some very simplified version of spherical astronomy and the way actually Persians, not only Persians, but many other nations as well, observing the sky and measuring the sky. And you also have your own set of explanations. So we go.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, so first we're going to, it's really important, as I say, the reason I want to have Ehsan on is because he's an astronomer and he's calculated the astronomy and showing like the history of the astronomy. And that is so crucial to understanding the fact that, first of all, these ancient, astrologers and astronomers, they knew what they were doing. They weren't making all these mistakes and again, one of the things is that now there's all these ideas that, these people were wrong and they were wrong and they made all these mistakes, which is, it's like, these were like the Einstein of their time. These are the people that developed all of the math. One of the things to know is that all of our mathematical systems were really developed by these people who were tracking the movements of the planets. Like all of our math came from that. And so once you start looking at this in all the ancient cultures, they all shared with each other. They did some things different, but it was mainly they were all sharing with each other, and they all knew what they were doing. And I'm going to actually be talking about a few of the reasons why we get confused. Actually, that's my part in it. Ehsan's going to be doing more of the technical, like here's how this stuff is calculated and how it works. Plus, he's really delved into both systems, and he's developed software. I'm going to be talking more larger structures like, well, here's why it's so confusing, because we're going around the sun, but from where we're at, the sun is also going around us. That's the only time that happens, and several other things. So we can understand these things conceptually as well. And one other thing I wanted to say really quick is you were given the explanation of like when we look at a chart, it's like the surface, and then behind it is all of that calculations. It occurred to me, it's kind of like, it's like the skin of your body is like, oh yeah, I'm this skin.
Exactly.
And actually the skin was produced by all this other stuff that's inside that you don't see. The skin is just the surface, or even the world, like the skin of the world, and underneath is all of the power. The skin is like the sort of byproduct of everything underneath of it.
Yeah, and I met my mentor on Persian astrology something like 6 or 7 years ago. He lives in another city, and then I went to his place, and I before we start, actually, I asked him, "May I have your birth data?" And he gave me his birth data. I simply entered the data into my software, and I said, "Is it your birth chart?" And he said, "Yes, it is." He was speechless because it was the first time he saw that somebody can do the chart immediately with one click, on the computer. And then we went to the dinner, and he said, "Okay, what's your birthday?" I said, "Okay, it's 27 October 1982. He said, "Okay, and what's the time?" I told the time, and he said, "Okay, so your Aquarius rising, that sun in there, and your Jupiter is like this, and your Saturn is also there, and so transiting Saturn over your Jupiter is on that age. So your father was like this on that age, and then progressed. He started to progress. He started to tell me about every, his mind was like a software.
He did it right all in his head. He just boom, yeah."
Yeah, exactly. And then I said, "Okay, actually, I don't have a computer. You have the computer."
Right. Yeah, that's and that's what they did back then. And it's like we act now that that because we can plug in a computer program and turn it on, that we somehow understand this stuff. But what they did back then, it was a simpler time, but it doesn't mean they were simple or stupid people. It means that they spent all this time in contemplation. So those people who developed these math techniques and formulas, and those ancient astrologers, all this was in their head, like like with this gentleman. And so they didn't just, the math calculations, it's even the same thing. Even the math calculations and the spherical geometry and stuff that they developed, that was also like the surface of their wisdom. Just like we're talking about with the least important thing to them was the math formula. That was the byproduct of all of that work. Like Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra from studying with the Indians, but it was all of that he was contemplating inside that produced the algebra formula, right? Exactly. Just like Albert Einstein and E equals MC squared, that was the byproduct of all of this other stuff that was in his head.
Exactly. When, for example, I ask you an address, then you say, "Okay, go straight, then turn right, then turn left." So actually, they were addressing the sky like this. Imagine a line from the vertical prime to the left, like 30 degrees, and then this is like this and that. They could easily imagine all the calculation. Actually, that's the reason they didn't write. And they didn't draw the paintings for the spherical astronomy, because they didn't it wasn't necessary for them. They could easily imagine. Yeah.
So you have some. Did you have some slides that you wanted to show? And
yes.
That would be great to see what you've done here. And again, people should know that Ehsan created the Bindu software. So his software calculates all of this stuff, and it's like Vedic and Western. And so he's really the man. That's why I wanted to have him on to really talk about this, especially like the history of the astronomy and the astrology as well, because Ehsan has studied all of this, and there's very few people that I know actually who really have studied this stuff as well. Because I've studied back into the Vedas and the Babylonians and Greeks and all. It's very hard to find people that actually know it.
Okay,
All
so
right.
before I go to the calculation part, I want to tell you about the quantitative system of powers and weaknesses of planets. Actually, in Persian astrology, we have a system very similar to Shadbala, but it has three main layers, like highly effective, medium effective, and low effective. And each layer per se actually divided by three: high and mid and low importance. So the total number of powers are 93, and the total number of weaknesses are 84. And it's really important here because among them, 18 of them are belongs to the signs, and 20 belongs to the houses, 22 belongs to the sun and moon and nodes. 9 of the power and weaknesses are for the degree of the planets. 23 for the sign divisions like the Vargas and bounds and terms. 6 for triplicities, 24 for planetary relationship, 5 for fixed stars, 6 for direction and motions like retrograde, direct, stationary, and so on. And then here we have 34. Most of them, the majority of them belongs to astronomical and coordinations. So it's really important for Persian astrologers to use the coordinations in the way actually they use them. So I showed. So in the picture, actually every astrologer is familiar with this picture. It's a picture of the equatorial plane. And this is the zodiac here. And you can see the spring equinox, which is the tropical Aries. And then you can see on the other side, the fall equinox, which is the Libra in tropical system. And then we can have two hemispheres, the north hemisphere and the south hemisphere of the equatorial, of the zodiac, on the equatorial plan. So what is the value of the north and south here? Well, here north is on the top and south is on the bottom. And then the value of the north here shows the more extended, more expanded, having more light, at least for the northern hemisphere of the Earth, because the equatorial plane is the extension of Earth's equatorial. And then we have, if we see the course of the sun, we see from the winter solstice, the sun comes up and ascends. So from here, it's called ascending half, from winter solstice to the summer solstice. And in Vedic system, we call it Uttarayana. And then from the summer solstice, it comes down or descending half, which is Dakshinayana. So these two ayanas are very important. If you refer to Bhagavad Gita, I think you have some explanation for it. On the chapter 8. Do you have any explanation here?
I don't have it right now in front of me. No, I don't have the quotes in front of me. No.
Well, in chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita, actually it explains about the way actually the yogi goes back to the Parabrahma. And it explains that if the person dies in Uttarayana or the full moon, actually the yogi directly goes to the Paramatma. So here it's about the ascending of the soul and descending of the soul. And then it's more important here if we have two quarters, the quarter of ascending toward north and descending toward south. So ascending toward north is more valuable. Having a planet or sun on this quarter is more valuable because it's both ascending and both northern. Astrologically and astronomically, it has astronomical significance as well. And here, in the descending towards south, it's actually more weak because it's both descending and both southern. And then again, we have the sphere of Apsis. Here we have Earth in the center. And it's really funny because this is the way, actually, because in Persian astrology and ancient astrology, they were thinking of everything in form of circle, not the other forms. So here, to explain how the apogee and perigee should be determined, they have a point outside the center. Here, Earth is in the center, and they have a point outside the center. And if a planet moves on this circle, it meets the apogee and perigee of the planet. So the importance of apogee and perigee is as actually the ascending and descending. And it is the same for exaltation and debilitation. So literally in Persian astrology, ascending to the north is called exaltation to the north. And descending to the south is called debilitation to the south. So if a planet considered like exalted and debilitated in these two actually arcs.
And is this, let me just ask a question, because so apogee and perigee are certainly, they're related to each individual planet.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So each planet, it's not, so the apogee and perigee, so it's not the Earth apogee and perigee, it's each planet apogee and perigee.
Yes, actually they can be aphelion and perihelion.
And perihelion, right. Perihelion, helion comes from the sun. So it's their relationship to the sun is what these are mainly based on, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And it has to do with their orbit. It doesn't have to do with the elongation of the orbit. Sorry, you have to explain some of it to me as well, because I haven't calculated in that depth. It has more to do with the elliptical orbits. Is that correct?
Exactly. Here I have the elliptical orbit in the yellow, in the background.
Okay.
But actually, that was the way in ancient astronomy was actually explained. But here you can see in the background here.
So that yellow is the elliptical orbit of the planet.
Yes. But the planet has another orbit here. It's really interesting because as you can see here, there's a yellow circle here, which is the sphere of rotation. A planet moves on this sphere, the blue one, and at the same time rotates in an, actually this yellow sphere rotates on the blue sphere.
So this is very mechanical. So this is Ptolemaic theory, right?
Yeah.
So this is all observed from the Earth. So it doesn't literally rotate in a sphere. It's from our point of observation. This is Ptolemaic theory. Yeah. So the Ptolemaic epicycles and cycles. So when this is all observational, and I just want to interject here a little bit, is that all of this is observational because we're perceiving all of it from where we're standing.
Yes, exactly. And then you can see actually here again you can see if a planet actually moves on this circle, actually we can see the retrograde motion.
Right.
And direct motion.
So it's showing the observation, and this was developed by Ptolemy, at least really perfected by Ptolemy in what's called the Ptolemaic theory. This was the prevailing astronomical. They actually thought this is how the universe worked, not that it was just our observation of it. And then later with Copernicus and Galileo, they understood that we have a heliocentric, and this is just an apparent motion, not an actual motion.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's
no. That's really important. It's really important because although it's just apparent motion and it's not a real motion, but some astrological theories actually based on these motions.
All of them are. I recently did a class, just really quick, where I said to my students, I said, so did the sun rise today? Oh yeah. I said, no, it didn't. The Earth turned on its axis. And I basically said, even though we are not the center of the universe, the sun is the center of our solar system. Astrologically, we are the center. And astrology because that's the only constant position is from where we're standing. So everything is measured from where we're standing. So even though the Ptolemaic theory scientifically was disproved thousands of years later, we still use that Ptolemaic geocentric is what it's called, geocentric model.
We have to.
Right, we have to, because that's where we're seeing it all. That's where we're perceiving it all. So the fact that the planets don't actually move in these epicycle circles doesn't mean that that's not how we perceive it. So welcome to the world of why this is confusing.
Yeah.
So please continue.
Yeah, and again, in this, in the second sphere, a sphere of motion, we also have the ascending and descending.
Right.
So ascending here means actually have some astrological meanings, and descending also has some astrological meaning. Of course, a planet in the ascending half is more powerful than the descending half. And then here, actually there are 2 points which are a station to retrograde and a station to direct. These 2 points are very valuable, like the nodes. Every conjunction of 2 spheres, every conjunction between 2 elliptics are very important, like the nodes, like the Rahu and Ketu. We use Rahu and Ketu in the it's interesting. Recently, I found that in Surya Siddhanta, the black moon Lilith, which Western astrologers are using in the Apogee and Perigee, called Bhumi Nicha and Bhumi Acha, Bhumi Ucha and Bhumi Nicha. Like the exaltation to the earth and debilitation to the earth. But actually the term Ucha and Nicha are not for exaltation and debilitation. Like they are like upper and lower.
Yeah, that's their general meaning, is upper and lower. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been conflated to be exalted and debilitated, but yeah.
Yeah. So for using all these spheres, and as all of them are defined to the equatorial, so we have to, actually in Persian astrology, they have to use the tropical system to calculate all these things.
And it has to be measured tropically because we're experiencing it. Well, I'll let you explain. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes.
Explain it better.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, you can explain it better. I'll just let you go.
So we have to use them tropically, and then at the same time we have the real visible sky. At the same time we have the constellations, we have the fixed stars, we have the way we see the sky. So abstract reality, mathematical reality, and the visible reality, and simply the reality. So
yeah, and just real quick, the thing I wanted to say was that this is why many times you see in the ancient text there's a transposition, like when you look in Surya Siddhanta, or even when you look in certain texts. I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. Even things like Srimad Bhagavatam or other texts that get into cosmology, they describe the universe as a globe, as a sphere, and they kind of mix things like very precise astronomy with sort of figurative language, because they're also trying to bring in the idea that of the abstractions of space and spirit and all of this. So you'll see a sort of collision of ideas and scientific methods. Some of them are literally scientific, like math calculations, and others are more sort of poetic. And again, this is also one of the things that are so confusing. That's kind of my part in this a little bit, is to see this is one of those other areas where we can get really confused, because people start looking at texts like Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or others and start trying to practice astrology from it or something, which you just wouldn't do, because that's not what they're talking about. Even if they make a reference to an astrology sign or something, you look in the astrology texts for astrology. You wouldn't look there for something like that. So anyway.
Yeah. So the problem here is actually we never can have such a view. We cannot have the whole universe like a globe to look from outside. But if we imagine we have such a view, we can see, everything from outside of the earth, like the God sees, let's say the Brahman God or whoever has an eye that's located on that place. He or she maybe can see the world like this. And this is the way actually we imagined the spheres. And then,
one other thing, just really quick, and I meant to say it, and I didn't, but one of the biggest we can even see this kind of confusion in things like the modern flat Earth theory, because people can go back into these texts and look in something like the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Surya Siddhanta and say, it says it right there that the Earth is flat. So what are you going to say? Ptolemy, and because they don't understand that this is a perspective.
Yeah, it's a flat-hand Earth.
Right, because we're standing on it. But I'm saying this is how it can get confusing, is even because they do have statements in there that describe even the Earth as a sphere and all of this, or I'm sorry, as a plane and all of that. So again, we have to use a lot of discrimination and not mix things up when we're looking into the ancient texts as well. So
yes, exactly.
That's I wanted to make sure that a really big example, aside from maybe getting confused about zodiacs, is things even like flat Earth, like we see everywhere now. And people quote Vedic texts to prove it, and the statements are there, but they're out of context.
Yeah, very true. And then actually when somebody from outside looks at the whole space and takes the Earth in the center, the person or the God has this view. And then it's really interesting because when we go to the books of constellations and the fixed stars in Persian or Arabic, we see actually they have two different drawings. The first drawing on the right is written the constellation of Gemini as seen on the sky, and here on the left is written the constellation as seen on the sphere. So at the same time, they could imagine how the things can be seen from the person who observes from the Earth, and how it can be seen from outside, or for the other constellations as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, wow. So they were definitely zooming out. Yeah, and just real quick, the one thing that I observed about Persian astrology is that at that time, Persia was really the melting pot of East and West. If you want to see what they were doing and seeing how they were evolving and working through, because they started studying from the Surya Siddhanta, primarily at least 6th, 7th, 8th centuries. There was a lot of stuff from Surya Siddhanta and from the Greeks and from the Persians as well. But they had brought a lot of that Indian, a lot of the math, which again also led to like algebra and all of these other things. But then they also embraced a lot from Greece, of course, with Ptolemy and the Ptolemaic theory, especially from like the 5th, the 6th to 8th, 9th centuries. You see a lot of that. And then they developed their own as well. So Persia, especially at that time, was really a melting pot of all the systems and the traditions. So it's not surprising that they saw it from every different way, because that's what they were doing. They were embracing all of it. And there's a very distinct difference between India and Greece in their practices. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later when I go back and show the Indians from the Rig Veda and whatnot. They were very, very different, and they had their astrology developed by like the 4th, 5th century. It was like sidereal, everything is lined up, and that was it. And they still embraced other astronomy and whatnot, and were influenced by astronomy and all of that, and even mainly influenced by the Persians, especially with the Takija system. But their astrology didn't change. Their astrological practice stayed the same because it was already fixed. And back into the Rig Veda, 1200 BC, they were already using sidereal. So, but it's not surprising that the Persians were looking at it from every direction.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact is actually at the same time, we cannot ignore the visible sky. We cannot ignore the way we see the fixed stars. So they went into the fixed stars and they started to measure actually the sidereal year, the sidereal months, and the sidereal synodics. And also they actually measured the lunar mansions, both in tropical and sidereal at the same time. But here there is a very big confusion because, on that time, it was the time that actually both tropical and sidereal zodiacs were almost the same. Within the Ainamsha was something like 2 degrees or 3 degrees. So
to make it even more confusing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to make it interesting, they're both exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're very right. You know, when they both were the same, it was the biggest time for make a mistake.
Yep.
It was a time to make the mistake because, you know, you cannot distinguish which one is the one you are talking about. So you can see the fixed star exactly on the 15th degree, let's say, exactly on the zero, as you can see, for example, Spica on the 0 degree of Libra. So you have a Spica on the 0 degree of Libra, and you can say, okay, this is the pinpoint fixed star. It's fixed, exactly fixed, and actually it takes something like 72 years to understand that actually.
To move 1 degree, which you still can't see with your naked eye. And then you're looking at it from this sideways perspective, and are you measuring it equatorially or by the the
location?
Yeah, or location. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So it was the
continue. Yeah.
I can imagine here that it was the time that actually the most techniques were developing, and it was the time that they couldn't distinguish these two at the same time. So they could imagine that, okay, this fixed star is fixed on that time, so this is the correlation between the fixed stars and the tropical. Finally, something like 12th century, as you said, they understood that, and then they started to decide whether they want to use the tropical or sidereal. And then it's really interesting because they humbly understood that if we use sidereal, we have to give up about many calculations like the house systems. So actually the house system, which is known as whole sign houses, which is better to be known as no sign, actually no houses, because actually there is no house. It's simply about the zodiac and its qualities in the sidereal plane.
Sidereal, right. This is very important. So what you're saying is that with the Persians, by the time they made the decision and they decided to work with tropical, that if they were going to use sidereal, they were going to give up like the house systems, because the house systems aren't really a part of sidereal, because in sidereal you're locating the planet on the ecliptic, and houses and signs are the same because you're just finding it in that quadrant of space.
Exactly, yes.
Right, which is exactly what I noticed as well. It's very clear that sidereal, that Indians locate the planet on the ecliptic. Now, again, people can debate how you're calculating that, whether it's ecliptic longitude or equatorial longitude or whatever. These are different things that people can look at. But regardless, when you locate it, you're locating it in space. You're not locating it based on where you are on Earth. That's what all the house systems are about. And this is how the tropical Western system really developed, was to find more innovative ways to connect with that three-dimensional spherical geometry and connect the person on Earth to all these obliquities and angles in the sky, whereas in India it was very simple. It's here on the ecliptic. Now that's not hemisphere-based. You don't get into any kind of hemisphere seasonal sort of confusion or anything. It's just right here on the ecliptic plane. So this is what happened, you're saying, basically in Persia when they started using the tropical, and they used both, right? So
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. I'm going to share something which is very famous in Persian books. This is a chart which is known as the chart for fall of Persian Empire. The text says, when the world became new, it was 3 months and 27 days before Hijrah. Hijrah is actually the date which Prophet Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina.
Okay.
The inspiration of the Prophet Muhammad. And it was Sunday, 3rd of Ramadan, which is the lunar month of Arabs. And the conjunctions of two malefics, which are Mars and Saturn, was on the first house in Cancer. And it explains the conjunction caused the fall of Persian government and the power of Arabs, because Persian capital was in Iraq, and Iraq belongs to Jupiter and Cancer. And Arabs are associated to Scorpio and Venus. Venus is Mubtaz, which means actually translated to Al-Mutan in Western medieval astrology, and means victor, because it's exalted and it's in the 10th house. And because MC is 15 degree and 35 minutes of Pisces, and Venus is on 18 degree and 28 Pisces. So the war was for religion, and Arabs' religion overcame. So here it shows that actually the person who casted this chart uses a quadrant system, uses MC, and uses the house system anyway.
Mm-hmm, right.
But here is the given chart. Well, this is the chart style Persian astrologers use, very similar to the Vedic chart.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see, the ascendant is the Cancer, and Saturn and Mars on the first house, and Venus is in the 9th house. And then I casted the chart using my software. Okay, it said when the new year was 3 months and 27 days before Hijrah. Well, it says when the year became new, not when the sun came into Aries.
Okay.
So it doesn't distinguish either it's tropical or sidereal.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says it's Sunday, 3rd of Ramadan. And when I casted the chart of the tropical chart of solar ingress into Aries, I found that it's Thursday, not Sunday. And then you can see the moon and the sun, and it's something like the Amavasya, not the Amavasya, the first lunar day.
Yeah, first Tithi. Or
yes,
no,
the first Tithi.
Or that's 15th Tithi, isn't it? Or no, first. I'm sorry. Yeah, the circle goes the other way. Yeah, first Tithi. Got it.
Yeah, it's the first day, and they are just 4 degrees apart.
Mm-hmm.
But the text mentions it's the 3rd of Ramadan. The 3rd day. It is impossible. You know,
right.
There are 2 mistakes. If we take the chart correct, there are 2 actually unforgivable. It's not easy to forgive these mistakes. You know, the day of the week and the day of the month. 2 big mistakes.
Right.
But it's not the fact is actually the tropical New Year is on Thursday and the sidereal New Year is on Sunday. Simply, actually, these are the information for the given chart. We just have sun at the 0 degree. And we have moon in the 6th degree of Taurus. On the tropical chart, we have moon on 4 degree of Aries. But if you cast the sidereal chart, it will be 6 degree and 38 minutes in the sidereal chart.
And it works, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I see. Also with Saturn, so the longitudes were off.
Yeah. So simply, it's something like 2 degree and 54 minutes. Ayanamsha. The difference was something like 2 degree and let's say 3 degrees. So this is the reason. That's the reason. Actually, most of the Persian astrologers simply made a mistake. They couldn't notice that this is a sidereal chart.
Mm-hmm.
Because simply.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No. I was just saying that. Yeah, this was the fall of the Persian Empire. I remember we also saw one for the beginning of Baghdad, where or when Baghdad was initiated. And yes. So what was going on at this time, like Ehsan and I were just saying, was that the 2 zodiacs, aside from the fact that we have this visual complication that we're trying to measure where something is in this 3-dimensional space, we already have to create a kind of false model, really, to explain the motions of the planets. Because if we see it from the heliocentric view and the planets are just moving around the sun the way they actually are, it doesn't make sense based on what we're seeing, because we're also one of the objects going around the sun. So our relationship, this is what I'm going to explain a little bit too, our relationship not only to the sun, but to all the other planets is best explained by the fact that we're on something that's flat and still, which is, first of all, not true, but it explains the motion better. those other objects appear to go around us in these circular epicycle motions. And this is observationally correct, even though it's literally incorrect. And exactly. So this is why the Ptolemaic view lasted for thousands, like 1,500 years, and it was very hard to disprove because we didn't have that perspective that Ehsan was even talking about, where we can actually see it. We needed to find proof from other things, and actually Galileo figured it out because he was watching the moons of Jupiter, and he was watching different types of astronomical phenomena, and then he realized, first Tycho Brahe modified the Ptolemaic model a little bit. I don't know if you know this history of astronomy. First Brahe modified it, then Copernicus said, oh yeah, I think this makes sense, but he was kind of outcast. Then Galileo said, no, this is the truth. And much of what they used to decide was the Persian math. And there were earlier Persians who also put forth these ideas, these theories. I don't remember their names. But this history of astronomy is really important because you see it at the time, like Ehsan is talking about, you have a collision of these two. It's not just the astronomy, but then it's the calculations. One is the sidereal fixed portion. And again, you can measure the year sidereally and whatnot, but you're certainly measuring space sidereally, or measuring them tropically, which is based on the Earth going around the sun and projecting that into the sky. And so again, especially at this period in time, and I would say especially in Persia, because they were using two different systems. Like I said before, the Indians never varied, at least in their astrological practice, from the sidereal calculations. Now, there was some debate about whether they were using ecliptic longitude or equatorial longitude, and those kinds of things were sort of in contention in India. If I got that correct, please correct me. But they still never varied from sidereal, and of course you would see they wouldn't, because everything was nailed to the nakshatra space and time from the beginning of time. And I'm going to show some quotes here in a minute to show that. But of course, once the Babylonians formalized the 12 30-degree zodiac, of course it fit right on top of the Indian already existent sidereal zodiac. So the issue was decided a long time ago, and there was never any variance, even though they were interacting with Persians who were using tropical, and of course they knew about Greeks, and they were measuring the tropical as well. They were always measuring the solstices and equinoxes back in the Rig Veda.
In the horoscope of Baghdad, actually 3 astrologers were employed by the king.
Do you have the chart handy or not? Or that's
I don't have the chart with me.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. That's fine.
But the interesting point is actually 3 astrologers named Mashallah, which was a Jew, and Ibrahim Fazari. Ibrahim Fazari was actually the guy who translated the Surya Siddhanta. He and his son translated Surya Siddhanta to Arabic. And then Nobakht, which was the first royal astrologer after Islam. These 3 astrologers were responsible to cast the chart for laying the foundation of Baghdad. And that's really important. It's a very important time because 3 astrologers from 3 different schools of astrology, and also they applying 3 different schools of astronomy as well. So Nobakht was the Zoroastrian priest who converted to Islam, and he was using the ancient Persian system. And there is a theory. Actually, Biruni mentions. I want to quote a word of Biruni. He says it's impossible for Persians to learn the astrology from the incomplete and full of mistake translations of Greek and Indian.
I know Al-Borni was he was hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. He said it was impossible. It means that they already had a system, and then after the system damage, they used the other systems just to recover, not to make a whole system. Because you see how advanced they work and how what big progress they had after the 6th, 7th centuries. So it means actually they already had this system. And Nobakht was the guy who had all the terms, and he uses all the when you go to his works, you see his every word he uses is the translation of the ancient Persian words. we could actually, my team and I could actually trace back some of the words from ancient Avestan and Pahlavi texts. And like the words actually we use for the separation and applying aspects, we have these ancient words for them. It means actually
Ishrafa.
Yeah, exactly. Ittisal and Ishraf, Insaraf actually are the Arabic words. And Peywastan and Gorikhtan, you can see how strange is the word Gorikhtan. This is the Pahlavi term, and the Peywastan is the Pahlavi term also for applying. So we have this in Pahlavi text, which is written before Islam. So it means actually before the year 622, and something like 5th century BC, we had Persian astrologers who were using applying and separating aspects.
So that was before it's before the fall of the Persian Empire and before the Arab legacy, and then the influx of Indian and Greek to try to kind of resurrect the sciences. So it's interesting because Brahmahira says the same thing about the Yavanas. He says, we thank the Yavanas for their influence, but we got to get these barbarians out of our science and restore it to the Brahmins. So and again, this is just an integrity of practice. It doesn't mean that the Yavanas, they weren't really Greeks, they were foreigners of some place. They thanked them, but then said for their interest, but it's not authentic Indian astrology, and Brahmahira was there to kind of restore that. But what you were saying was that Baghdad was established from the three main traditions: the Zoroastrian, the Indian, and the
Vedic. Indian, yeah.
So they use sidereal tropical. So you want to finish the thought there? Because I didn't feel like you had said the rest of it, or did you?
Well, yeah, actually it's almost finished. But the fact is actually three big schools met once again at that time. And it was a huge achievement at that time. And then it was the time that Surya Siddhanta became the most important textbook of, let's say, the Islamic world. After the invade of Islam, actually we call it Islamic world. So all the actually astrologers after Islamic world, most of them used Surya Siddhanta, unless they started to develop their own zijas. And also some of them, something like 14th century, 15th century, they started to develop some really important and really precise zijas.
Zijas are star charts, they're astrology charts.
Yes, exactly. And from that time up to today, we always had the tropical. After the 14th century and 15th century, almost all the astrological works written in tropical, not sidereal anymore.
Right. And so this is the part to me that's just so fascinating, is this historical shifting that happened when, again, this was like from about the 6th century to about, 10th, 12th, 14th century, there was a shift, first, like you just said, it was the fall of the Persian Empire. And then when they developed Baghdad, which was part of the Islamic takeover, there was at least a few hundred years where Indian, like the Surya Siddhanta, as they called it, Sandhand, right, was translated into Arabic. It was translated into Arabic, and the Indian astronomy was, and their astrological systems were prominent. And then it seems like the works of Ptolemy, it seems to me like, from what I've been able to piece together, that first of all, people have to understand that the zijas that, as I mentioned, are literally their astrology charts, but they were star charts, literally ecliptic star charts. They were kind of inseparable from a zodiac chart. Like we would map the sky astronomically now, but not really astrologically. Like even if you go into a solar system app or something, the planets are there, but it's actually, of course, it's sidereal based. But this was what their astrology charts were as well in Persia. They were inseparable from star mapping. This is important because then they found that the star maps of Ptolemy, especially in a book called Almagest, and a section of it called the Handy Tables from what I've understood, is that this was the shift that really happened to the Greeks. Was those star tables were much more accurate, and they found quite a bit of the Greek astronomy to be more accurate than what was in the Surya Siddhanta, or at least in different applications. Then they translated Tetrabiblos, the astrology work, into Arabic in the 9th century. And this was, again, we talked about it a little bit before, but the kind of big shift that happened with them by the 12th or 14th century. It was purely tropical by then, for the most part. And that's what we also have in Western astrology now. But this important shift is really is quite important. I guess the shift is really important. And Persia really shows that whole thing. It also resulted in the Indian practice of Takija astrology, where they literally were sharing Arabic methods with Indian calculations and whatnot.
Yeah, and the way actually the Indians took the Takija system was very amazing, because, for example, they, for example, converted the length of the rising time of signs. They took the rising time of the signs in a tropical way, but they converted them, instead of using hours and minutes, they converted them into Gatis and Vigatis.
And can you explain Gatis and Vigatis? What would that be different than tropical time?
Well, actually, no, it's not different from tropical time. Simply, they divide the day by 20. We divide the day by 24 hours, but they divide it by 60 Gatis, and they actually divide every Gati by 60 Vigati, and then again 60, like this. And then
I didn't know if it was a different measurement, because you said tropical then to Vigatis, so that's just a different terminology.
No.
But then the Vigatis were sidereal. I guess was that happening or no?
Well, actually, basically, Gati and Vigati system is for the measurement of the day and time for a sidereal day, for one rotation of the Earth. And then they actually measured the length of rising of any sign, the duration of rising of the signs, using the Gatis and Vigatis as well. So in Tajik Nilakant, the book you have in your background, they're actually it explains by Gatis and Vigatis. So when they want to find the time for finding the events by Sahams or the parts, then, for example, they use that Gatis and Vigatis in a sidereal way, but with the tropical length.
With the tropical length or
length, duration.
Right. So
this is a mistake. This is a mistake actually, because they simply forgot that the system is developed for the tropical usage, and then they use the same values for calculating using the sidereal version. So the length of rising for the Scorpio sidereal is not equal to the Scorpio tropical. We know that.
Right. So were they not using 12 30-degree portions, or how was that? How was it in tropical being? How is it being calculated tropically when you say the length of Scorpio? Because the original sidereal Babylonian was 12 30-degree portions, and how is it different using the tropical in this system?
In both tropical and sidereal, we have 12 to 30 degrees portions. This is the same. But I mean about the rising time. The time that the tropical Scorpio rises is not equal to the time that that the sidereal Scorpio rises, because actually the tropical Scorpio is something like a portion of a Scorpio and a portion of Libra.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So how do you think they reconciled that? So how do you think, like in Tajik Nilakanta and in the Tajik system, these what would be considered astronomical errors, at least tropically or from this perspective, how do you think that gets reconciled?
Well, they simply took the tables. Actually, if you go to the tables given in the book, you easily understand that actually the tables are tropical. The tables are for the length of the sign in tropical, but we simply use the same tables in the sidereal when we practice Tajik in sidereal.
So I'm just trying to figure how it still works, because I mean, again, I'm open to error. There were definitely some errors here and there with, especially while these things were happening. But what is the, how does it? I guess the simple thing is why do you think it still works?
Magic. Yeah, that's the magic of astrology. We have some certain parts of astrology which definitely works, and we have some parts of astrology that conditionally work. For example, we talked about the house systems, and the MC itself has a value. So if you use the MC in a sidereal chart, still it has a value, and you can interpret it regardless of which sign it falls in. Or for example, if you use a outer planet like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the sidereal chart, still it works. But sometimes some mathematical values actually changes some variables that we cannot see where the error comes from. Maybe I can say maybe the reason that we are not that much accurate is that we don't have all the correct
maybe some of the calculations, some of the variables. It's interesting, yeah, because I actually didn't know that this. So I'm glad you're telling me. I actually didn't know that this this calculation of it's just the calculation of the lugna, or is it because of the conversion of the tropical degrees to Vigatis led to errors in that application?
No, it's about the calculation of Sahams.
Oh, of the Sahams. I got it. Okay, got it. So it just influences the Sahams.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm understanding better. Sorry, now I'm getting it better now. So it mainly influences the calculation of the Sahams and how to. And by the way, the Sahams are also what are called the parts of the lots, the Arabic lots.
Yes, Arabic parts or Arabic lots. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now I see what you're saying. I understand it better now. Well, that's amazing. Anything else you wanted to share about that? Because that period in history also is I'm sure you've at least because you've studied the Arabic astronomers and the and that tradition a lot more than I have. I've definitely looked at quite a bit of it, but I haven't been immersed in it. Are there any other things that you notice as being real kind of sort of touchstones of history, like of historical importance of, all of the systems interacting? Because again, to me, Persia was just this melting pot of I gave my brief overview of like India, Surya Siddhanta, this, Greeks, Ptolemy, handy tables. That's what I see from the outside. And
let me tell you something.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me tell you something really quick.
Yeah.
Actually, Iran is in one side of the earth, and exactly on the opposite side of the earth, we have United States. So it's really interesting because the ancient Iran is something like the modern United States. And that time, it was like the way United States actually brings all the knowledge of every part of the world together. You as an American have the knowledge for the Vedic astrology. You have the knowledge for the Persian or ancient or medieval astrology. You can find any kind of, not astrology practitioners, but any kind of spiritual practitioners all around the United States. So the same was going on in ancient Persia. So astrologers, astronomers, occult practitioners, and any kind of scientists were constantly traveling to China, to India, to different parts of the world. So the word Estan means state, like the Astana, which we have in astrology for the houses. The term is Estan means state. So every country you hear that has the suffix Stan, like the Pakistan, Tajikistan, Hindustan, which is the India, Serbistan, which is the Serbia, and all these countries actually were the states of Iran once upon a time, or if it was not the state of Iran, they were the countries named by Persians. like the countries which named by Greek Greeks, which have the suffix "ia," like the Arabia, Persia, Syria, and so on.
Alexandria.
Alexandria, yeah. So Iranians also have the Estan for their name: Pakistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, like this. So all these countries were the states of Iran. So constantly they were. Even they were requesting for the books, and they were requesting for the scientists to come. The king was writing to the king of the other stan, the other state, and okay, we hear that you have a scientist named this, and we need him to come and teach in Persia. So they were invited that person to Iran, or they were sending the person to Greek or to China or to India. It was a constant relationship between all these states.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and yeah, I didn't realize that was I didn't realize all the countries named Stan had were actually of Iranian or Persian. It's Persian. It was the Persian Empire at the time, and it's now the area that we call Iran.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I noticed and that I felt, or when I started looking into it more, was that center, especially at that time, was the center of great progress. I mean, this was how all of the astronomy progressed. All of the, they weren't, it was a very open kind of place where they were taking in, like you say, from everywhere. So you can see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. So we'll just go through a few things here, and just again, that was great overview. I mean, overview and in-depth look at the astronomy, and a talk about the different cultures and histories and how things can get confusing. And definitely, we've been looking at how a lot of things got confusing for quite a while, and why they were confusing. I actually think one of the biggest reasons why there's confusion, especially about the two different zodiacs, is that we don't even really define clearly what the zodiac is in an astrological sense. It's gotten conflated, and we see especially zodiac sign names used for a lot of things. So I'm just going to read through this. I kind of just wrote it out so I would stay on track. But first, it says, what is a zodiac? So for purposes of astrology and the deeper implications of any debate, I offer this definition, that the zodiac is where we find the exact location of planets and other celestial phenomena as they move through the sky, viewed from our vantage point on Earth. So again, when we're talking about a zodiac, we got to first say, what are we talking about? And it's literally, where do we find the exact location of some body, or something like an equinox or some other thing as viewed from Earth? So much of the confusion I've seen has arisen from discussing zodiac and calendar factors interchangeably as if they're the same thing. In the ancient texts, zodiac sign names were often used to describe things that have nothing to do with locating objects in space. And you see there's very distinct language that's being used. So zodiac sign names used to describe things in a non-astrological context, especially related to the seasons or whatever, is really confusing. For example, Aries is a zodiac sign that measures and locates the object in the sky. That's what Aries is astrologically. It's not a month. It's not a season. That's not what it is astrologically. Of course, we can use it as such and calculate the sky that way if we want, but at that point, we're still measuring the space, but we're doing it by projecting the seasonal calculation into space. So again, it's effective to see the two zodiacs like this. The sidereal zodiac is anchored to the actual sky behind the planets, as if they're sections of space or stars like beaming light to us or something like that. The tropical zodiac is anchored to the calendar and equinoxes, as if the seasons are pushed up or projected into the sky. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so examples of the zodiac sign names describing non-zodiac things. And we see this in all the texts. So it said the ancients used the same terms to describe two different calculations, sidereal and tropical zodiac signs. It's very confusing for us now because we would never do this. From Tetrabiblos, there's a section called the power of fixed stars, where it's clearly sidereal. The stars in the head of Aries then have an effect like the power of Mars and Saturn, mingled with those like those in the mouth, like Mercury's power, and moderately like Saturn's. Those in the hind foot, like that of Mars. So this is Ptolemy describing the stars in each sign, this whole section. He goes through each 12 signs sidereally and describes the important stars in it. Total sidereal.
Yes.
Then in the next chapter, he says, or at least it's in the next chapter, he describes the zodiac as pinned to the vernal equinox. Although there's no natural beginning of the zodiac since it's a circle, they assume that the sign which begins with the vernal equinox, that of Aries, is the starting point of them all, making the excessive moisture of the spring the first part of the zodiac. And then he goes on in other sections to then call zodiac sign names spring, equinox, autumnal equinox, and the zodiac is now totally tropical. So again, he calls them by both names. Sidereal Aries and tropical Aries are both called Aries, even though they have nothing to do with each other. They are completely separate things. There's nothing, they have no resemblance to each other. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so something really important about chapter 9 is that, as you said, he associates the fixed stars of head of Aries to the nature of Mars and Saturn. Then he associates the hinder foot to the nature of Mars. And he also associates the stars on the mouth of Aries to the nature of Mercury. So he actually gives the planetary rulership to every fixed star. So actually, he sees the fixed stars as the smart objects on the nature of the planets, and at the same time, independent from the zodiac.
Right.
They are parts of it. Yeah, they are parts of the zodiac, but at the same time, independent.
Yeah, and absolutely, but it's purely sidereal at this point. There's no, it's totally. You know, I could have picked out a few. I put, of course, in Aries, or I'm sorry, Scorpio, he talks about Antares and Mars. In Makar, Leo, he talks that they're similar to Jupiter and Mars. And again,
yes, exactly.
So he focuses a lot, not just focuses, but of course, because there are these major stars along the ecliptic, Regulus, as it's called in Western, or it's a Greek term, I believe, or maybe even Roman. I don't know what language is that. It sounds Roman, doesn't it? Regulus?
I don't know.
Yeah. So, but it's totally sidereal. He goes through each of the 12 sidereal zodiac signs. Nothing to interpret. It's just clear what it is. And then right after that, it's totally tropical for the rest of the text. And even when you're saying tropical, he's using the exact same names, though. It's the same thing. Aries is still Aries, whether it's space or it's equinoxes. And so this
the question here.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the question here, were he aware of both zodiacs at the same time, and were he using both zodiacs at the same time with two different contexts?
Yeah. So let me go on, because now I'm going to talk about the same thing in Surya Siddhanta. We see the same thing. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. But this is why I'm saying this is one of the biggest things, is everybody's like, they act like it's the same thing. And literally it just stopped. They act like, well, sidereal or tropical, one is that, one is that. No, they are two totally different things that have no resemblance to each other. They have no resemblance to each other, right? So again, we just want to say, Ptolemy calls them both by the same name. Sidereal Aries and tropical Aries are both called Aries. We would never do that. So we're tempted to think they must have been confused. Again, this is where you get into all of these really kind of weird arguments now, that were the Greeks wrong? Were the Indians wrong? Who was confused? Which one is it? Because it can't be both, except it certainly can once we open our mind. This is clearly just the way they discussed it. He clearly knew both. He developed the Ptolemaic theory. Of course he knew both. So he's not wrong. Exactly. He's just using the same names to describe two different things. So let's go to the Surya Siddhanta. We see the same thing. From the Surya Siddhanta, chapter 1, at the very beginning, which is really, and you'll see when I get into the Indian quotes, at the beginning is where they define the zodiac and they define the calculation. So chapter 1, the mean motions of planets, it says the planets moving westward with exceeding velocity but constantly beaten by the asterisms fall behind at a rate precisely equal, proceeding each in its own path. 60 seconds make a minute. Oh, I don't have the, boom. 60 seconds make a minute, 60 of these a degree, and 30 of the latter is composed of sine or rashi. 12 of these are revolution. For some reason, I omitted the last part of this quote which talks about the nakshatra. Here it is. Let me read it down here. Hence, they have an eastward motion. By their movement, the revolution is accounted complete at the end of the asterism revati. Sorry, I didn't, for some reason, put it in that quote. But in the Surya Siddhanta at the very beginning, it's saying that the planets and the objects moving in the sky, it's from the chapter called Mean Motion of Planets, right? So they're talking about the motion of planets, very beginning of the book. So it says that they have the eastward motion. By their movement, the revolution is accounted complete at the end of the asterism revati. So they're finished at the end of revati. 60 seconds make a minute, 60 of these a degree, 30 of the latter is composed a rashi, that's the word they use, or a sign. 12 of these are a revolution. Okay, so it's clearly at the beginning of Surya Siddhanta. And again, you have to look, it's at the beginning. The beginning of the text is where they define the zodiac. I'll just jump ahead here. I have these quotes here from all the major texts at the beginning of the book. They define the zodiac sidereally at the beginning. I'll jump back to this again and read through it, but they define, you know, those are called grahas that move through nakshatras. The said comprises of 27 nakshatras commencing from Ashwini. The same area is divided into 12 equal rashis commencing from Mesha. Brihat Jataka, the same thing. Celestial globe, signs commencing with Mesha and Ashwini, each formed by 9 padas or quarters. And then, you know, of stars governing, you know, govern the following organs of Kala Purusha. So again, clearly nakshatras and rashis, nakshatra padas aligned. From Horasara, who is the son of Rahamihira, 2 1/4 of stars make 1 rashi. Each of the 12 signs is constituted by 2 1/4 stars or 9 padas with Ashwini in the start, in Aries, and Revati at the end in Pisces. Jataka Parija till you go forward. Every astrology text and astronomy text like Surya Siddhanta at the beginning of the book, chapter 1, chapter 1, chapter 1, chapter 1. In Parashara, it's chapter 3, but that's because the first 2 chapters he's describing the cosmology. But all of them define the zodiac at the beginning of the text, and they don't go back and repeat it later because it's not good scholarship, and Indians were very economical about their texts because the texts were memorized. So they didn't go back later in the book and say, remember when I told you at the beginning it was sidereal? They're not going to do that, okay? They don't remind you.
Yeah.
But so now let's go at the end of Surya Siddhanta. Let me just do this and then we'll go. But because we'll see this example. At the very end of the book of the Surya Siddhanta, it says, from the sun's entrance into Capricorn, 6 months are his northern progress. So likewise, from the beginning of Cancer, 6 months are his southern progress. Thence also are reckoned the seasons, the cool season, and the rest, each prevailing through 2 signs. These 12, commencing with Aries, are the months. Of them is made up the year. So this is all at the end of the book. And as we see, it's not describing the zodiac or objects moving through the sky now. It's talking about seasons. It's talking about months of the year. It's calling months and seasons and solstices zodiac sign names. So again, we're used to seeing this, but we're stop looking at it. Because again, he's saying the sun's entrance into Capricorn, 6 months are its northern progress. Now we're talking about, this is literally what we talk about when we say tropical zodiac, but we have to understand this usage of Capricorn is not describing planets moving through the sky. It's describing the Earth going around the sun. We also see statements in non-astrological astronomical texts, such as the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vishnu Purana, that use the zodiac sign names this way. They use them the same way. So this is clear evidence that they were using these terms to describe things that have nothing to do with an astrological zodiac, erecting charts and other things we do as astrologers. None of those books have anything to do with practicing astrology, yet they were using those same terms, even in Srimad Bhagavatam, in Vishnu Purana, I think, there might be others, where they're saying Aries as the vernal equinox. It's indiscriminate. They just use that term now to mean the first day of spring. And again, this is clearly not what we mean by it's not what we mean by Aries when we're talking about the zodiac. And these two things have gotten conflated, like, well, who knows? It's just a different calculation, or it's just, you know, so it's very confusing.
Yeah, it's also another area of confusion because actually if we take the Uttarayan and Dakshinayana, as I described in the first part, as a movement of sun from the solstices, from the winter solstice to the actually from the zero Capricorn to zero Cancer, and from zero Cancer to zero Capricorn. If we take these two, so we should define the Makar Sankranti as here also described as the Sankranti. Actually, we have to measure the Sankrantis also in a tropical way for the calendar years.
Yes, this is another error. This is an error in the Indian calendar, which is absolutely true.
Exactly.
Sankranti should be tropical, no question about it.
But at the same
that's
time,
different than the zodiac. That's different than the zodiac because that's called the Sora. That's a Sora month or Sora ingress. It's not a zodiac because we're not measuring. Capricorn is an astrology term, and this is actually Earth going around the sun astronomy.
Yeah, so actually we also have two Makar Sankrantis. Once actually it's on the 21st of which month? December, is it?
The Makar Sankranti, it's actually December 21st is the tropical ingress, which is the solstice, and then like January 15th is the sidereal.
Yeah, this is also the confusion. Which one is astronomical
and
which one is astrological?
It's actually wrong. Yeah, it's the Sankrantis again, but this is where we need to have discrimination because they're different things.
Yeah.
They're different things because one is the Earth going around the sun, and again, we're attaching zodiac sign names to it. And that's why I said at the beginning, first we've got to define what is the zodiac. There's no reason to call it Capricorn. We could call it December. Yeah. There's no reason to call it Capricorn. The reason it's confusing is because we're calling that Capricorn. And Capricorn is a zodiac term that's measuring objects moving through the sky. Like I said, we can use that calculation to measure the sky, but they're not inherently the same thing. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And again,
exactly.
This is why the last time when I was talking about tropical zodiac, this is why the tropical zodiac has gotten confusing. This is also why the Indian calendar is confusing because of the indiscriminate usage of these names, mainly because in Brihat Jatika, Varaha Mihira used the same names. But he was talking about sidereal Capricorn. Like, for instance, when we go down and look, do I have those? Oh, I don't have that quote here. But when we talked the last time about the tropical zodiac and that the calendar dates are identical to the zodiac sign degrees, we even see it on the astrolabes. And so this is why we have this whole idea even of sun signs. Sun signs are really a Western astrology or Westernized concept because we literally see why they are sun signs here because the sun and the calendar, the solar calendar, is literally called by zodiac signs, by zodiac sign names, and those degrees. So again, let me just go through and again. So this is at the end of the Surya Siddhanta. This was in the last chapter. Certainly after the Indians had been mixing with Persians and Greeks and whatnot, so they had definitely adopted that convention by that time as well. But you can just see the difference between a zodiac, which again, at the beginning, he's talking about, again, the zodiac is we're looking into the sky, finding the location of planets in the sky. That has nothing to do with us going around the Earth and the seasons.
Well, there's something I want to point, which is, I remember Robert Hand quoted something really nice. He said, Western astrology was never fully tropical, and Vedic astrology was never fully sidereal. And, in Brihat Horashastra chapter, the chapter related to Vimshottari Dasha, when he explains the Vimshottari Dasha, he starts from the Kritika and Sun. Do you remember the verse? Beginning from Kritika, the lords of Dashas are the Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Ketu, and Venus. So it starts from the Sun, and it makes sense that, there is an school of nakshatras which considered Kritika as the first nakshatra. Before, I think it was a reform of Vedic astrology that, later they added Ashwini and Aries together, and before that, it was a progress of equinoxes, which made Kritika the first nakshatra.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then on that time, Kritika was on the vernal equinox, and so it was the first nakshatra, and it was the time that they also set the lordship of the nakshatras, probably for the first time, and then they probably set the sun for the Kritika as the first nakshatra, and then the moon for the Rohini as the second nakshatra, and so on.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, there is I have a theory that the pinpointing of 0 Aries to the 0 Ashvini can be something that added later. Do you think something like this?
Well, it was added. Well, let's put it like this. So yeah, these are interesting issues, and obviously there are many indications where it said that Kritika was the first nakshatra. It was, of course, where they started at the time that. Well, perhaps even at the time, not even perhaps, but almost certainly at the time, I'm not doing the math in my head right now, but even at the time of the Rig Veda and the Vedanga Jyotisha, maybe 1200, 1500 BC,
Mm-hmm.
Let's do the math and figure it out. But this is a different, I don't know that it says this for all time, that this is the first one, or that this is the beginning of the zodiac. At that time, they weren't using 12 zodiac signs yet. So it was just a nakshatra-based zodiac. And I say obviously, almost certainly seems to refer to the time that perhaps the nakshatra schema was conceived of, and it certainly makes sense for a lot of reasons, because the lord of Kritika is Agni. It's also, actually, if you look astronomically, it's the Pleiades, which is where our sun came from in a very literal sense. The sun came from the Pleiades cluster, and again, there are many reasons why you would declare this to be the first nakshatra. Again, why you would declare that to be the first nakshatra in the schema of nakshatras. It is a separate issue. It's a different issue than the zodiac of the clear delineations that we see once horoscopic astrology began, and the 1230 degree divisions from Babylon, again, either imported to India or co-created with Ashwini and at the beginning of Aries, and all the techniques that developed later, which is also the important point that we also have to say, is that these systems developed, and then all of these techniques to translate that system is what we're left with now. We now have 2 distinct systems, and the Indian system always developed with a sidereal basis, and with Ashwini and Aries beginning the circle, just like we saw at the end at Surya Siddhanta, that the end of the circle of asterisms is Revati, and we see in all those other texts that the beginning is Ashwini and Aries. And again, this is at the beginning of astrology text, which means that's the beginning. This is where you start before you do anything in the rest of the book. Before you look at anything else in the rest of the book, you start with this calculation. So certainly in Indian writing, it's very clear, because they have an exegesis. They have a structure that was put together to teach these things. They weren't just indiscriminate. So at the very beginning of the book, it says, here's the zodiac, here's the calculations, and now the rest of it, here's the techniques and methods that you use. So obviously, this other thing is, obviously, Kritika was called the first nakshatra. There are many reasons why we could say it, but that's not different than, I'm not really sure what that has to do with tropical. I actually think that it might refer back to the Babylonian times, when because their year and seasons began at Taurus, and it could have been a reference back to that. That's basically what what's his name, Fagan, Cyril Fagan, that was his theory. Cyril Fagan's theory was that this is proof that the Indians and Babylonians were actually working together, because they used to call Kritika the first nakshatra. And he said this is one of the ways that the Indians got bamboozled by the Greeks, because the Greeks called Aries the first zodiac sign. The Indians shifted and made it Ashwini. So there are several theories about this, but I think they're kind of different. So what would you like to say?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you, and you made it very clear. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Did I? I'm glad I did. But does that make sense to you as well? Because I'm not just trying to convince. I want to get back to like what you think.
Yes, actually, the development of sidereal zodiac and the development of tropical zodiac can have two different point of views, and they are not necessarily developed at the same time.
Yeah.
Some people, like some astrologers, like Ptolemy, could have both of them at the same time. There are very rare astrologers like Ptolemy or Varahamihira. They're very exceptional. They were, something like sitting on the back of the zodiac and riding the zodiac.
Yeah, and we already see a different historical development. We already see that the whole nakshatra schema developed literally 2,000 years. It was formally literally 2,000 years before we had the horoscopic zodiac. So the Indians were measuring sidereal time and space in the Vedas 1200, 1500 BC. We didn't even get Varahamihira until 500 AD. That was 2,000 years later. We forget these are big stretches of time where they were already using sidereal. So there's many reasons why they would have declared Kritika as the first one. And again, not to be snarky or anything, but I've seen those who want to discredit Indian astrology or say, oh, they were always using tropical or whatever, to say, well, see, what about that? There's 100 ways to explain that. I don't even really understand why tropical would come into the conversation. It's just literally that they were calling this one the first one. Oh, it could have been because the vernal equinox was there at that time. That's possible because they were certainly tracking the equinoxes and the solstices. So that's possible. That's the reason. There are a lot of reasons, though, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And,
and I don't discount that either because they were measuring. And again, it's not a contest. Indian astrology, regardless of that, has always been sidereal. That's not even really a debatable point. The fact that they were, and they were always watching the equinoxes and solstices. They were doing both. And again, it's only when we have a narrow vision that we're trying to use one part of it to disprove the other part, when none of that's really, legit. So go ahead.
And, I just want to mention that Varahamihira has the book Pancha Siddhantika, which is 5 different Siddhantas.
Right.
And so he explains actually you have to understand all these 5 waves of understanding the sky. Otherwise, you are not an astrologer.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, like we already said, the main source of confusion comes from misunderstanding the sun, I think, because again, it's one object, but it's measured 2 different ways. And, again, we're circling the sun. And we measure that with the calendar. Whether you're doing astrology or not, you do have spring, summer. And this was the first thing they did. Basically all of them were first measuring us going around the sun so that we knew when to plant our crops and all of that. But from where we're standing, we already said, on Earth, the sun is also circling us. Along with all of the planets, eclipses, sky objects, we measure those things with the zodiac, including the sun, as well as the precessional cycle, the cosmological ages. All of those things are measured with what was forever the sidereal zodiac because it's the stable, solid one that's not moving. So there were literally like 2 things. One, which is the stationary, what's called Nirayana chakra, which is the space without the seasonal consideration, and then there's Sayana, which is the space with the Ayanamsha, with the seasonal precessional calculation. So again, because we're measuring the sun, one object, 2 different ways. Again, because we have to live on Earth, the sun is the only thing that's important as it relates to the calendar and all of that. And all the stuff, all the astronomy that you explained earlier was really just the Earth going around the sun. We didn't really get so much into the spherical because it's tricky to then calculate the space and house systems. We can maybe talk about that on another call at some point. But it was all about the Earth going around the sun. But we forget that's just the calendar, and that's literally shown by this. This is what they did later, is so that we could codify and advance scientifically, especially with things like astrolabes and other kinds of devices. It was much easier to just join the calculation of the Earth going around the sun with the sky. And then we can also align with fixed stars and do all kinds of stuff. So there was a great benefit to joining the sun and the tropical, quote, zodiac with the sidereal. To join those 2 things had a great benefit to us, right? But again, we also have the Narayan chakra, which is just measuring space. And you see here, you know, that this whole thing of the sun going this way and that way, it takes care of the whole tropical zodiac calculation when you're measuring space. So the whole tropical zodiac calculation, if you're looking at it as a zodiac, like in the sky, we can see that whole kind of thing measured by how the sun moves along the horizon, rising and setting. But then we have all these other things that are going on. We have all these other planets. Venus is going around, Jupiter, Saturn. None of those things have anything to do with our orbit around the sun. Nothing. They have nothing to do with it. And again, like we saw, Ptolemy measured those things in epicycles and all other kinds of motions. None of that has anything to do with us going around the sun. So we got to remember, when we're taking tropical zodiac, we're taking that calculation and projecting it into the sky and applying it to things like Venus and Jupiter and Saturn, which, again, of course we can do it, and there are reasons to do it. But, again, we just want to know that that's what's happening. Does that make sense? I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Yes, exactly. You know, as you said, there are several ways to observe the objects, and there are several point of views, and they are not contradictory.
Right. Right, they're not.
That's the point. We can use both of them, but each one should be used on its own place. The way actually today I tried to explain the way we used it in the Persian astrology, and you also try to explain the way you used in Vedic astrology. Actually, I also follow. I just make this part clear that actually it's clear for you and I, but I want to clear for the listeners. Actually, the way we discuss is not to invalidate the other zodiac. And I myself use the Sidereal zodiac. And in the previous video, I also said that for the simple things and for the clients, for the simple interpretation, when a client comes to me, I use the Sidereal zodiac and I use the Vedic chart first. And if there is a reason to go into Persian astrology, because studying and practicing Persian astrology is very hard and tough. It's not easy to apply the Persian astrology for every client. It was the astrology for the kings and nobles. So
what would be great is, and again, it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because sometimes when I say these things, some people get triggered, especially those who use tropical or whatever. It's not to trigger them like it's wrong, but I'd love you to give, but you know, there is that part where, why are we using that calculation? So I would love for you to explain why, like, for example, because using tropical zodiac is not just projecting that into space. There are astronomical reasons, especially with the techniques that are used in Western astrology. And again, this is the important point, because then Western and Persian astrology developed around the subtleties and the depth and the nuance of that calculation. The calculation's not wrong. And again, a lot of Vedic astrologers need to get off this idea that the tropical zodiac is a mistake as well. It's not. It measures space in a different way. Like we said earlier, Sidereal is nailed.
And both can be correct.
Well, they both are correct. They're both correct. They're just different. Sidereal nails everything to the ecliptic. So even houses aren't really necessary in Vedic astrology. That's why you didn't see any Vedic house systems until Shripati in like the 12th century.
Maybe it's the time to mention about the Krishnamurti Padati. The Krishnamurti started to use the Placidus houses. He started to use the many like actually leaving the Rashi chart and going to Baba chart using Placidus houses. And he also defined his own Ayanamsha, and then he also used the Western aspects instead of the Drishtis. And he made his own system. I don't want to say actually the way he.
That's fine.
I don't want to judge. Sorry.
No, I said it's fine. Look, like we've said before, I've said many times, I honor all systems. That includes people that want to be using the tropical Rashis and Sidereal Nakshatras now or whatever. We just got to get straight and not mislead and make mistakes along the way. I'm not sure how he does it, though. What does he do?
Well, he actually first he defined the sobs for the first time. He used the term sob, which is the unequal divisions of the nakshatras. He used the Placidus cusps, and he also used the what is it? He also used outer planets,
Oh,
Uranus
okay.
and Neptune, and he also used the part of fortune in his calculations.
So he was
And
using all kinds of stuff.
yeah, he uses all of this stuff, and to me, it's very good. It's a very very nice system, but it was something like somebody who uses he uses a different kind of stuff which are not originally.
Yeah.
It was not a Vedic system.
There are a lot
of
neo-Vedic astrologers now that do this a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, it was something really modern, and but at the same time, I found something really wonderful about the ruling planets he uses. This is another subject, and I often use the ruling planets in Krishnamurti Bhattacharya system to rectify the charts, and I can say it almost worked to me. I can say 99%.
Fabulous.
I could use that.
Look, I totally see why people would do something like that. I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, but I couldn't, I couldn't interpret the charts successfully with that system.
Oh.
So, parts of that system worked to me, and some parts didn't work to me.
Right. And so this is the thing that people will need to understand is that, and again, because you have so much experience, both systems and the hybridizing of it in the Persian, which is its own system, that having you on where you've seen all of it work, you've also seen where, and again, in the previous time we spoke, you had said there are certain things like you would never do, like you would never look at dashas and then something like tropical or mixing certain things that are purely from another system. Again, I also see the same thing where it's like, well, I don't know what it would be off the top of my head, but really kind of almost, well, certainly the integrity of the nakshatras and the rashis being aligned, for example, like we talked about, I think before we started, and other structures, it's really hard, for my practice at least, to break those things apart. And we see that these texts, especially Indian texts, were very self-contained. They start at a certain point, which really defines the zodiac and the calculations, and then it tells you how to apply the methods to the calculations, right? That's exactly the way it's meant to be done. People can do whatever they want after that or whatever if they want, but again, it should be known that this is what it is and understand that.
Exactly. I'm a fan of integration, but actually I need to understand how perfect this integration happens.
Yeah. And is there any basis behind it, or are we just kind of pulling at something and pulling something out of thin air and what, like what's behind it?
Yeah, so I don't like this.
So let me just say this last bit here, because it's really important to see the Sidereal zodiac and the tradition of Sidereal in India, because again, one of the things that's very much a recurrent theme once you start studying not just Indian astrology, but even Indian sciences and culture and whatnot, is it's very old. And it's especially when you look at the zodiac, it's perhaps the most unchanged. Well, I mean, Indian stuff does change a lot. I mean, there are a lot of different schools of yoga and even Ayurveda and spiritual teachings and practices and traditions. There's a lot of variety and changes. But one of the things that hasn't is really the astrology, which it's remarkable that it hasn't. And again, it's so stable and foundational that the seasons and solstices and the zodiac in the Vedas were really profound. And I think it's been quite overlooked, especially in the Vedanga Jyotisha. You'll see that they really clearly had these things separated and measured out distinctly, and you see why. The idea that they would change at some point or suddenly realize, oh my God, tropical is right, let's forget everything we were doing. It's just so unbelievable, right? Because first of all, because what they did was right and it worked and it was really powerful. So in the Vedas, the Indian calendar correctly measured the seasons and aligned them with solstices and measured them with the sidereal zodiac. So seasons and solstices were aligned correctly and measured with the sidereal zodiac. They had 12 Sara or solar months. Again, we just saw where Ptolemy is calling months astrology sign names, and literally even in Surya Siddhanta, by the time of Surya Siddhanta, they're saying that Aries and whatnot are months of the year. They're not even saying Aries or zodiac signs anymore, right? So by the time of the end of Surya Siddhanta, that's what's being said. Here, it's very clear. The solar or the Sara months were connected to solstices and seasons, and measured using the zodiac of sidereal space and time. So the Vedas have several sections that describe the ancient approach to Indian timekeeping, the year, the seasons. So this is in the Yajur Veda from the same book as the Vedanga Jyotisha. Book 4, stanza 4 states, ye are Madha and Madhava, the months of spring, Vasanta. Ye are Chukra and Suchi and Sushi, the months of summer, Grishma. So you see 12 months of the year, Nabha and Nabhasya, Isa and Urja, the months of autumn, Saha and Sahasya, months of winter, Tapa and Tapasya, the months of the cool season. So they had 6 seasons and 12 months. These are solar months, totally based on the Earth going around the sun, not 12 zodiac signs, right? So these 12 portions of the year were pinned to the Earth and the sun. Again, the Sora year, that's what it was called. Like the 12 months of the calendar. So these 12 months are akin to the Gregorian calendar months of January, February. That's what this is. This could be January, February, March, April, May, June. That's what these were in the Vedas. This is like 12 to 1500 BC. They had a 366-day year and 12 months in the year pinned to the Earth going around the sun. They had the calendar right that long ago. It was correct, right? And then it says, but in India, every 3rd month began a new season and was coordinated with a solstice or equinox. The entire cycle began on a new moon in the month of the winter solstice. It seems that's what it was. It's pretty almost what it was. So they had the 12 months, but then the year began on the new moon in that month of the winter solstice. So the year began, the new moon, the month of winter solstice, which is, as we also might understand, very close to what we would call now Makar Sankranti.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's near the solstice, but it's the new moon. So notice, this is the whole point. Lunation cycles are why there are 12 months in the year and 12 zodiac signs. They're measuring lunation cycles because the sun and the moon are the primal timekeeper here on Earth. The Earth goes around the sun once, that's the year, but within that there are 12 lunation cycles, 12 30-day cycles. So the reason there are 12 zodiac signs and 12 months is because we measure the lunation cycles in a year. That's why there are 12, okay? But we got to understand they're different. But calendar months are different. That's the Earth going around the sun and 12 portions. So you see, they get the 12 portions pretty precisely, but then they begin the year on that variable day of the new moon. And by the way, it's still that way. Even now, those synodic months are the same in India, right? So it says here, but the same also, it says, but the year also had 12 soli lunar synodic months that marked the full and new moons. These months had the same names in the Vedas that they have now in modern India, Magha, Falguna, Chaitra. We see important celebrations in daily life connected to the soli lunar calendar. These cycles are astrological, not seasonal in nature, which means they're measured sidereally. You can't measure them tropically because you never know where they're going to be. The sun and moon are not predictable. Only the Earth going around the sun can be measured tropically, because that's the only measurement we know for sure. That's why we can pin the calendar to the Earth going around the sun, because we're always going to be there on that day.
Yes, may I add something here?
Absolutely, add something, yeah.
Actually, Arabs before Islam, Arabs were also using this system. And then after the Prophet Muhammad comes, in his very last year of his life, he canceled this rules of solely lunar. And then the Arabic calendar started to rotate. So
I'd love to see the documentation of it. I'd love to see that. I'd love to have you present that at some point.
Yes, sure.
But so
maybe next time.
Yeah, so you can see. So again, this is from the Vedanga Jyotisha, or from the Yajur Veda, the Krishna Yajur Veda. Now, from the same text, we see the earliest Vedic astrological references and how timekeeping was approached and how the zodiac was calculated. Solar months that we just looked at were connected to seasons and solstices, but measured by the sidereal zodiac in space and time. So here are a few important sections. The year length and the connection of the seasons to the solstices are seen. 366 days for the solar year. In the year are 6 ritus or seasons, 2 ayanas or solstices. In the year there are 12 solar months, 5 years make a yuga. Okay, so this is all tropical at this point. Solstices, ayanas, solar year, 5 years make a yuga. The following verses show the new moon in Dhanishta, or Shravishta, Nakshatra began the solar lunar month of Magha at that time. It also shows the solar calendar month of Tapa and the year Yuga beginning on the winter solstice, or that new moon. So we see it here. When the sun and moon occupy the same region of the zodiac together with the asterism Shravishta, at that time begins the Yuga and the synodic month of Magha, right? The solar seasonal month called Tapas, the bright fortnight of the synodic month Magha, and their northern course. So you see they're aligning everything now with the northern course of the sun, with the beginning of the year, with the and with the new moon, right? So all of this is all Vedic timekeeping. Now he says, now we see the nakshatras measuring both the northern and southern course at the time of the text. That's what we just saw. So they're measuring the Ayanamsha at this point. So clearly they understood. Then he says, when situated at the beginning of Shravishta segment, the sun and moon begin to move north. When they reach the midpoint of Aslesha segment, they begin to move south. And it says they, of course, one would think they know that it's the sun. But so they're saying that at the beginning of Shravishta, the sun begins to move north. In the middle of Aslesha, they begin to move south. So at this time, the northern course of the sun, which is the solstice, happened at in Dhanishta at the beginning. So this is how we know it was like 12 to 1500 BC. And then it says this, 4.5 asterismal segments is one season. So now we see them measuring sidereal time. So 6 seasons multiplied by 4.5 nakshatras equals 27 nakshatras. So they were measuring the sun moving through nakshatras. Again, it's not the moon, it's the sun moving through 4.5 nakshatras to measure one season, right? So then there's 6 seasons. So you multiply that by 4.5 to get 27. By the way, this is also why they settled on 27 nakshatras, not 28. This is my feeling. It's very clear when you look at that nakshatras aren't just space, but they're also time, right?
Yes, exactly.
And this measuring 5-year yugas, again, very clear by the number of nakshatras transited by the sun in 5 years, it says. In the same way, the total of the asterisms of the sun, which comes around 5 times, is 135. So they measured their 5-year yuga cycles by the sun going through 135 nakshatras. Do the math. 5 times 27 is 135. Of course, 5 times 20 is 100. 5 times 7 is 35. So they measured 5-year cycles of the sun moving through nakshatras. So they're clearly using nakshatras to measure space, like solstices and equinoxes, and time, like seasons and yugas. So again, one of the things also to understand is this idea that even just general, this concept that nakshatras are related to the moon. Yes, it's the distance that the moon travels in a day generally, but as far as timekeeping is concerned and Vedic energetics and timekeeping and whatnot, they are clearly also measuring the movement of the sun through nakshatras from the very beginning and measuring solstices with nakshatras. Again, this is the zodiac and the calendar factors that are very clearly distinct in the Vedas. There's no mixing here, none. They're measuring space and time. They're measuring, in fact, the time of solstices and equinoxes with space, with the zodiac, which is clearly sidereal, or what you would call the Nirayana chakra. And just to jump ahead here, so it's clear in the Vedas that the Indians connected the seasons to the solstices and the new moon of that month, and also began the year Yuga at the time. They also measured everything with sidereal space and time, even though no zodiac signs were mentioned in the Vedas. We must conclude, unless compelling evidence suggests otherwise, that the Indians would continue to measure the sky surrounding the earth sidereally, as indeed they did, as we see. And then I have these quotes here from the different texts that shows they always maintained that sidereal measurement of the sky. There's one quote that I didn't, that was from Brihat Samhita, where Varahamihira says, there was indeed a time when the Dakshinayana was in the middle of Aslesha, and then Uttarayana was at the beginning of Dhanishta. Now it's at Cancer and Capricorn. And there's a clear distinction where he refers back to these sections from the Vedanga Jyotisha when he's talking about where the solstices begin in his time, about 400 AD, and he was connecting them to astrology signs, not to nakshatras. And this is, I think, one of the biggest reasons why Makar Sankranti has gotten so messed up, because he's saying the winter solstice happens in Capricorn, but he was talking sidereal Capricorn. That's where it was. And then,
I think so, yeah.
And then at that time, as we just saw, everybody's talking about astrology signs and seasons as if they're the same thing. And you saw in all the texts that came later, they're calling Capricorn the winter solstice. But they still use Makara sidereally in the culture. So this is why you see the conflation. Anyway, what do you have to say to that?
And another reason is actually in recent times we accepted the 4 seasons of Westerns more than the 6 seasons of Indians. You know, the 4 seasons are accepted globally, and the 6 seasons is the Vedic way. And you know, people who are not deeply into the Vedic astrology and with Vedic culture simply think, okay, we simply have 4 seasons, and
right.
that's it.
Yeah, and you see, especially in the well, let me just go back and show this again. Wait a minute. And in the I'll go back just for the Surya Siddhanta section again. One of the things that's really striking about the statements from the Surya Siddhanta, all of this stuff that he's saying, none of this is really practiced. And again, a lot of people have said this is proof that Indians should have been using tropical or whatever. But again, this is not zodiac indications. These are calendar indications. He says the sun's entrance into Capricorn, 6 months are its northern course. Likewise, the beginning of Cancer, 6 months are its southern progress. Again, thence are reckoned the seasons. And now they're bringing in 6 seasons. Thus are reckoned the seasons, the cool season, and the rest, each prevailing through 2 signs. So again, you could see these. Now he's referring back. It's different than the Greeks. They're taking these tropical indicators and referring them to 6 seasons. Again, which they don't do. I mean, and they're supposed to be doing this. Take the words Capricorn and Cancer out, and it's fine. The problem is they're calling them zodiac signs, and they're not inherently zodiac signs. They're not inherently the zodiac, right? And then it says these 12 commencing with Aries are the months. And he's literally saying these 12 zodiac signs are the months. Of them is made up the year. You can see the total conflation here, because they're not the months. They're not even the months in India. They're not the months in the West. Nothing in this passage actually has ever been done. Like none of this is practiced. Do you understand? Like none of this is practiced. Yes. So it really doesn't make sense to rely on this as something that maybe shows they should have done something, because again, it's calling zodiac signs months and all. So this whole speaking about the zodiacs as if they're exactly the same as the calendar. Again, this has been the big conflation, and both calculations work, but again, we have to kind of look at what's confusing everybody a little bit, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here.
Yeah, and actually, you explained one of the questions I had for a long time, which is about the Abhijit Nakshtra. Well, the reason actually we have 27 calendar nakshatras. We have 27 nakshatras, which has the calendar use. And we also, you also mentioned that actually Uttarayana and actually the Makar Sankranti for the calendar use is on the 0 Capricorn. So actually, the way actually we have Abhijit Nakshtra. Actually, if we divide 360 by 27, we get 13 degree and 20 minutes, which is the length of a nakshatra. And but if we divide length of a tropical month, which is 27.321, which is astronomical, by 27, the remainder is actually 0.321. We have 27.321 days, and if we divide it by 27 to have 1 nakshatra for 1 day, if we want to match the nakshatra calendar with the solar calendar, the remainder is 0.321. And if we multiply the 0.321 by length of a nakshatra, we get 4 degree and 16 minutes, which is the length of Abhijit.
Oh, okay. So it's tucked in there.
Yeah, so Abhijit actually ends at the 0 the end of Abhijit falls in the 0 degree of Capricorn.
Sidereal Capricorn.
Yes, in the sidereal Capricorn, and in the calendar system, it falls at the end of tropical Capricorn for the calendar use.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot. We've talked 2 hours. It was pretty fun, huh? Do you have anything else to add right now? Or you ready to go to bed?
Talk about, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. And thank you so much. I learned a lot from you, and I really enjoyed your words, and it was a very nice discussion.
Yeah, I learned a lot from you too. That's why I wanted to have you on. There's so much I didn't know about, especially about the history and about some of the calculations, especially with the Takija and the conversion to the Gatikas and all of that. Fantastic. And well, thank you for showing up, my friend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
All right, great.
Have a good day.
You too.